FutureSense is a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Hosted by Nyck Jeanes and well-known international futurist Steve McDonald, FutureSense provides a fresh, deep analysis of global trends and emergent technologies. How can we identify the layers of growth, personally, socially, and globally? What are the signs missed, the truths being denied? Science, history, politics, psychology, ancient civilizations, alien contact, the new psychedelic revolution, cryptocurrency and other disruptive and distributed technologies, and much more. This is FutureSense. What are we doing today? The first show for 2019.
Yes, welcome to the future. So today I thought we'd have a look at the transition factors between the layers of consciousness. So as we grow as individuals and as a species, we evolve from one paradigm to the next. What are the things that provide momentum for the shift between different ways of thinking, different ways of behaving? I'll run through all of the layers and the basic drivers, and we'll zero in then on the modern to relativistic,
which is the stage that a large percentage of the world is now transitioning into.
Yeah, it's where the dominant global paradigm is shifting from that scientific industrial thinking to network-centric humanistic thinking. And
we should frame this, especially here at the beginning of a new year, in the work of Claire W. Graves, which we're referring to there. And most of you who listen to the show regularly, of course, know exactly what we're talking about. But if you don't, perhaps just give a very brief summary of the structure of this particular model that we're referring to here.
Yeah, so the paradigms or ways of being human, ways of thinking, ways of behaving that we talk about, and usually I just refer to them by numbers 1 through 8, are drawn from the research of an American professor of psychology called Dr. Claire W. Graves. And Graves, he was a professor at Schenectady in upstate New York, at Union College there, teaching psychology back in the 1950s. And he was a contemporary of Abraham Maslow, who's a much better known, more famous psychologist.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, basic human needs, And Graves at that time was teaching 5 different theories of psychology in his course at Union College, and he would always get some questions from the students about which one was the best, which one was right. And eventually that drove him to do his own research.
It drove him nuts.
Yeah, it drove him nuts and to do his own research.
Good researcher stems from that sort of going crazy.
I think so. It goes with the PhD thing. And he studied 1,065 people over a period of about 9 years, and he looked at their values and their behaviours, their perspective on the world, and particularly his research was around the question, what is the nature of a psychologically mature adult?
Yes.
And when you ask somebody to respond to that, the best they can do is to respond from their highest self, right? Wherever they're at in their own growth.
Their idealistic aspect of themselves that looks towards that.
It would be idealistic if it was from layer 6, And so in doing so, what he got was a whole lot of different perspectives on what is a mature adult, how do they think, what do they put value on, how do they behave. And he then assembled a group of 7 of his peers who helped him sort the data and find patterns in the data. And over a long period of time, actually, he spent 9 years gathering the data, and then really he was analysing it and categorising it and refining it for the best part of, I think, 20 years or so before he passed away without publishing academically, which means that his work is lost to the academic world largely. It's kind of poked into a couple of different institutions around the world. I have a friend who's passed away now who based his PhD around Graves's work. But there's not much of it out there, and consequently, in my own study of it, I've had to do that outside of the structured educational.
Because he died in 1986, didn't he?
He did. He died of a heart attack in '86.
Before the internet age and so forth too. So
that's right. He had some articles published. One notable article was published in the Futurist magazine in 1974, where he wrote about the momentous leap that we're approaching, so in his work, there were sort of a small number of central things which came out of his work. One was this very interesting dynamic between the complexity of life conditions and the adaptability of human consciousness, and how as life conditions became more complex, then human consciousness in a plastic adaptive kind of way would also become more complex and more capable in order to cope with the higher complexity.
And that's also another way of saying that these systems are coping systems, aren't they?
Yes, they are coping systems. And also systems of perception, providing deep subconscious frameworks with which we make sense of our experience of reality.
And solve the challenges and problems of our time, our era, our place in civilization and our civilization at that time.
Exactly. And his work also mapped the change process, how we change when we move between these different stages, as he called them back in the day. I tend to use the language, or the words layers or
windows,
frequencies, waves. Tends to fit with the dynamics better. Because the dominant paradigm has shifted since he actually did his work.
Yes, that's itself an interesting fact.
Somewhat. So the change process he mapped out, and that really equates to things like the work of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. It's a journey that we take between these places. And also he mapped milestones on this journey towards greater complexity, the layers or stages of waves. And each one has its own framework for making sense of reality. Each one has its own values, has its own perspective on the world, its own behaviors and drivers. And it's very, very useful information. And basically, this is classified as developmental psychology. And developmental psychology is a little bit like quantum mechanics. It's been around for quite a while. You can trace its emergence back 100 years or so. However, it's not mainstream. In the same way that quantum mechanics is not mainstream, like most scientists don't factor in the observer element and how that might influence the outcomes of an experiment when they're doing their science, because we just, as a dominant paradigm, we just haven't got there yet. It's just too complex.
It's soft science, you could argue too.
We'll get to soft science.
We'll get to soft and hard science
later in the show.
Indeed.
We'll have a look at the transition factors between layers of consciousness, and then we'll talk a little bit about anthropocentrism.
Yes.
And how that's emerging with this next layer of consciousness that the dominant global paradigm is shifting to, and maybe look at some specific examples around science and maybe even climate science, just for
maybe even climate science and the notion of climatism, which is a term I hadn't even heard of until yesterday.
Yeah, I'd known about that for a while. I think you're obviously moving in the wrong circles.
No, we are. Different circles, yeah. I should add, just regards this from some information that you sent me about these layers as coping systems and some of the simple parameters around this, which I think are important for people to get, because it can seem like this is a personality profile model, but it's not that.
It's not that, no. So most of those personality profiles are looking at typologies. Yeah. So one of the most fundamental type differences between humans is male-female. Yeah. But obviously in the world of psychology you get introvert, extrovert, and all of those different things. And somebody can be operating, or let's say two people, for example, can be operating at the same layer of consciousness, so they're using the same underlying framework for making sense of their reality and the same values, but show up in a different way because one's a man and one's a woman, or one's an introvert and one's an extrovert. Okay, so and most of those profiling things that you're talking about are looking at those typologies and not the deeper underlying frameworks of actually what are their values founded upon. How do they perceive reality? What are the main things that they look for? So just these 4 points from one of your presentations here about coping systems that may help people to understand how this works. The coping systems describe adaptive capacities within us, not types of people. Secondly, none of the coping systems is inherently good or bad, but each one is suited to a particular living environment at a particular time. Thirdly, capacity to cope with complexity increases, as you said, as we progress to higher systems. And fourth, as we move from one environment to another, that is, for example, from work to home, different coping systems may be activated. So basically saying that you're not sort of stuck in one particular profile, that you will adapt and move depending on your situation. It's absolutely dynamic. And we have to grow into them, though. So we grow into these different layers and more complex layers throughout our life. And as a species, we've evolved through them. And once we've grown to a certain point, we still have access to all the previous layers that we've grown through. So it's like we're collecting a toolkit. And as you said there, each each layer is suited to solving particular problems. Like, for example, say that you need to screw a screw into a piece of wood, then you get a screwdriver, right? And do that. And then as we grow through different layers, it's like we collect these tools into a tool kit. So we start to develop like a Swiss Army knife of multiple tools, right? And then in the first tier of consciousness, which is the first 6 layers, the dynamic adaptivity is a subconscious process. So it just happens naturally, and we don't necessarily become aware of how we're shifting between different tools, but we've got the Swiss Army knife, and we can pull out whichever tool we need to, solve a problem at home or at work or whatever, depending on different layers of complexity.
Yeah. You're tuned to FutureSense with Nyck Jeanes and Steve McDonald. Engage, emerge, activate, and spiral up. 04373 4119. You should have that number in your phone by now. 04373 4119. And we have one text in which I just have to mention it because it's fun, and I'm sure you're very serious about it. But this person is saying, what about parrots that have 2 separated brains?
What about parrots?
What about parrots? What do you make? What do you make of parrots?
I don't made any study.
I love the word parrot just itself. I guess because it's been sort of anthropomorphized anyway. The word parrot is to parrot somebody.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's just a parrot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on the 2 brain thing, I don't know anything about parrot brains.
No.
But what I do know is that in Claire Grace's work, he identified this pattern whereby we would lean towards one side or the other side of our brain during each of the layers of consciousness. So we'll alternate between a left brain focus and a right brain focus. And when there was a left brain focus in one of the layers of consciousness, we would be all about changing the world to suit ourselves. And take a very individual approach to life and structuring society. And then when the right brain is dominant, we take a sort of, how do I adapt myself to fit with the world approach? And generally there is always a communal theme of some sort on different scales.
Apparently parrots are exceptionally intelligent animals. They use tools, they're both sophisticated problem-solving abilities, and they understand mathematical concepts. And of course they excel at speaking, and they have a particular brain structure which a unique brain circuitry, this article here in Smart News from the Smithsonian Institute says. So thank you for that question, because it is kind of relevant.
Right. Polly wants 2 times 4 crackers. I never heard one say that.
Well, no, I have no other. But possibly you say to a parrot, you might go 1 and 1 equals 5. And how could you argue? I mean, it's no doubt it's true in some universe. Got to be true in some universe. But let's come down to this universe, this place, and our journey as human beings, which of course includes all of the life on this planet, which is itself an interesting thing. We will get to talking a little bit about the anthropocentric tendencies that humans certainly have.
We will talk about that. Also, I might just mention before we dive into the pool really deep here, that we're on iTunes now. So this show is broadcast as a podcast on iTunes called FutureSense, and you can subscribe to it and get notified when the new one is out and all that kind of thing. And we're setting up a system in the background where we should be publishing this show about a week after it goes to air, and we'll do that consistently into the future. And
thanks to Ross Hill and others, particularly Ross Hill, who's sort of facilitated that for us. Very, very good.
And our audio editor in Bosnia. And
we've checked him out, and he's not a parrot. So let's look at the layers. We're going to go through a bit of a description here at the beginning of 2019 in the future as we are now.
So maybe because we're starting afresh for a new year, let me just quickly label the different layers as they showed up in Claire Grace's research. So the first layer, and we're looking at this from a species level, the first layer is like a hunter-gatherer type of existence, where it's very simple. It's just about meeting our very basic survival needs, and there's no complex culture or anything laid over it. And that at an individual level equates to like being a young baby, where we really don't do much. We don't draw pictures or anything. We just eat and sleep and exist. And then the second layer is at a species level, it's a tribal way of being human, where we gather together in large groups. And at the time that emerged historically, it also coincided with an explosion of culture. So we started to make art and that kind of thing. I guess because we're in a collaborative environment, and there was shared work, and people had spare time to make culture and those sorts of things, and maybe there were other strange influences as well.
And the rise of early rituals and folklore.
Yeah, exactly. And that equates, of course, to our family life in a personal sense. And then third layer is what Graves called an egocentric layer, where we begin to explore our power and we break out of the tribal boundaries. And we saw at a species level behaviors like moving populations that would raid other people's territory and use power over them to take their resources and control them and those sorts of things. Yeah. And we see this, an equivalent of this kind of behavior at an individual level in our teenage years, when we want to break out of those family boundaries. We want to stop having to do what mum and dad says, and we want to go out and find our own power, discover who we are in the world and what we can do. So we see that wild kind of dynamic that tends to be very impulsive and unstructured.
It's also the layer of image and glamour, which is interesting in this era now, of course, of social media and all the contentious dialogue around that particular issue with younger people in particular.
Exactly. It's very much about discovering who we are and what power we have, basically, to change the world. And so hunter-gatherer is an individually oriented layer, tribal is communal, the egocentric is individually oriented again, and we've got this alternating switching between individual and communal.
The spiral.
Yeah, in a spiral. And then 4 is at a species level the emergence of large-scale agriculture and large-scale civilization, basically towns and cities, and some of the major civilizations that in history, like the ancient Egyptians and the Greeks and those sorts of things, were built on this 4th layer. And it involves the activation or the kind of arrival on the scene of the frontal lobes of the brain, which are able to moderate all of those urges and instincts which drive the previous layers.
And it's the first rational layer in Graves' model. The first 3 layers you mentioned are actually pre-rational. This is the first rational layer.
Exactly, yes. And we see structured cause and effect thinking, and we start to be able to plan for the future and say, okay, if we do this now, then we'll be able to do that in the future. Whereas in the 3rd layer, it's all very impulsive, and there's often no thinking about the consequences of an action. And of course, that shows up in our teenage years. And when we sort of get to the point of our wild times as young teenagers in our early 20s, then we may grow into this 4th layer where we start to think about long term. We start to sort of knuckle down and get organized, have a plan, and look for some kind of set of rules to live life by. So the 4th layer always has some higher authority who makes the rules, and we go looking for that. And sometimes that can be religious rules, but sometimes it might be rules associated with the law or any kind of
moral codes of one sort or the other.
Yeah, any kind of structure that has a higher authority who lays it down and says this is the way it is and this is the way you need to be.
Yeah, I just thought, just going back to the 3rd layer, then I suddenly, when you mentioned that, sort of going impulsively into a situation, I suddenly thought of the Nazi army attacking Russia and finding themselves actually without resources, without that sort of bravado and predatory nature that they exemplified in a sense in this era.
Yeah, but from an organisational sense, they were much more organised than layer 3. I mean, the layer 3 behaviour is more like Genghis Khan kind of stuff, where it's very unstructured and loose and wild, and no one's following any rules.
Okay.
What you just described then was a failure of logistics planning by the German army, which is a much more sophisticated way of operating that belongs to higher layers.
Fortunately, you weren't alive then. They would have tried to grab you onto their side to do the job for them.
Never.
The strategist. I know you don't have those values. That's all right.
And so layer 5 equates to the modern scientific industrial era at a species level, and it's only been around about 300 years or so, and already it's starting to slip away, and we're moving into what's next. So it brought mainstream scientific thinking. The idea that we had to look to some higher authority to know how to live life was superseded by this modern idea that we could actually make the rules ourselves, and through a process of scientific experimentation, we can figure out what's right, what's true, what's good, We don't have to rely on the higher authority to tell us those things, and we can make our own rule set, which can be flexible and can be adapted.
Well, it's efficacious for our success, so to speak.
Exactly. So again, this is an individually oriented system, whereas the fourth layer was communally oriented. And we also, we saw the explosion of the first industrial revolution, which brought machines and leveraging things and exploiting resources and all that kind of stuff that the modern era has done for us. And at an individual level, you would find that kind of way of being human playing itself out in corporate work, any kind of job where you can start at the bottom and aspire to be at the top eventually, and simply on a merit-based process. Yeah. And it's all about you being your best and changing the world as best you can.
It's also a very good example of, which we've already mentioned today, the aspect of this model which talks about the solving of problems through that particular layer, that frame that you're looking at, but at the same time creating new problems. So as we've seen in the last few hundred years, many, many problems have been solved by our advancement, by our technology and the like. We've talked about some of those positive things last week, in fact, in terms of what's going on in the world. And yet, what it also does is create a whole new raft of problems which then have to be approached from a different layer of thinking.
It does, and this is like the wind turbine of evolution. It catches the wind and drives the whole evolutionary process. Is this tension?
Yeah.
So each new layer, as it emerges, it has a greater coping capacity. It can solve the problems that were created by the previous layer, and in fact, it was those problems which created the momentum for us to shift and change.
What a beautiful paradox! I love that.
Exactly.
Gorgeous.
And then over time, the new layer itself will create more complexity in our environment, which will mean that the problems become more complex, and eventually we'll have to outgrow it because it will no longer solve the problems. And my goodness, aren't we seeing a lot of that in the world at the moment, where people are trying to use old thinking to solve new problems, and it's just not working very well.
Yep.
Yeah. So beyond the modern, we have what is really the emerging paradigm on a global level, as the modern era is slowly dying away at the moment. And Claire Graves called it relativistic. Some people have called it postmodern. And I think the early waves of it were branded as postmodern, and we're starting now to see more sophisticated waves of this new layer show up with very sophisticated technology like blockchain and those sorts of things which underpin cryptocurrency. And it is a very network-centric way of being human. So it's very much about having a trusted network and being connected to as many people as possible. And it's also very humanistic. So it's centered around the human experience, and particularly from an emotional and a values-based perspective. It also has a deep drive to inquire inside and to seek out healing for anything that needs healing. And we see that in the growth of healing modalities.
Self-development, generally speaking. Actually, because we're moving into this, and particularly in this region, Byron is a very good example of a fairly advanced layer 6 small society. I'd just like to read these qualities from your presentation, because I think most people would be able to relate to these things now. Wholeness, sharing, community, networking, systems thinking, spirituality, feeling, caring, equality, peers, perspective, sensitivity, togetherness, balance, unity, organic, social responsibility, ecology, consensus, harmony, relativity, planet, diversity, and social justice. And planet's an interesting one there to me, because it's almost the first time really at this layer where we actually start to think on the global level.
Well, it's actually the second layer where we do that, because with the emergence of the very early emergence of layer 5, we had the first journeys around the world by ocean-faring people. And so we got this idea, or we discovered that the Earth is round and we can actually travel around it. And so it's like a finite thing. It's this sphere that we're living on. Whereas prior to that, it was largely unknown. And I almost must mention here, I also should mention rather, that history itself is rejigging itself right now, and a lot of what we've grown up regarding as conventional accepted history is being challenged. And there are many examples showing up of information from many thousands of years ago which actually shouldn't have been there. So when I make these historical comparisons, I'm making a very mainstream historical comparison in terms of what's generally accepted as human history. But I'm also aware that human history is a movable feast. And as we discover more about ourselves and who we've been in the past, some of the conventional stories that we've told ourselves are going to change.
Yes, well, and even, of course, there's, in this era, a reassessment of much history. And I'm thinking, as you speak there, of an article which I sent you yesterday about the British Raj in India and the very sophisticated stealing of what they, in this particular article, talks about $45 trillion over a couple of centuries.
Yeah.
And that even though for people like us it's kind of obvious that something like that happened, but when I read this article and how cleverly it was manipulated in that sort of layer 5 way of being at that time, but it's becoming obvious to many people that these things have happened. Indigenous history is another very good example. That slowly but surely we're revisiting history and reassessing what it means and what's actually happened there.
That's right.
And ramifications.
This happens in every sense, right across the whole spectrum of our experience of being human. As we transition from one layer to the next, we reassess everything. And we reassess it because we're seeing it from a different perspective and we're seeing it with expanded senses. So also as we grow through these layers, there are various senses and ways of being aware that grow and some new ones show up. And one of the things that shows up with this 6th layer is the capacity to take different perspectives on things. Whereas in the previous 4th and 5th layers, we were very much standing in a sort of a figurative sense in our mind. We were standing in one place and looking out at the world from our perspective. And our perspective in the 4th layer was very linear. So there was one path ahead, and it was the right, true path of the true believers, according to whatever rule set and higher authority that we've latched onto, right? And of course, you could have two people at the same layer there who had latched onto two different belief systems and had very different perspectives on what that single path looked like and what the details of the how to live life were.
Yes.
And then in the 5th modern layer, that single linear path ahead becomes multiplistic, so that you've got multiple paths and options to choose from, and that's where the scientific experimentation comes in, as you test which path is going to be the best for you and then you follow the best path. And then when we get to layer 6, all of a sudden that single standpoint that we've been imagining ourselves at in the previous layers becomes a vast network of standpoints where we can actually move and stand somewhere else in the network and have a very good idea of what it's like to see the world from that different place. And that's part of the dynamic of change that's rolling out across the world at the moment, is people all of a sudden can put themselves in someone else's shoes. I think in North America, the indigenous people call it the wisdom of the moccasins.
Oh, love it. Oh, the wisdom of the moccasins. Yeah,
so
very good.
You can put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand what it's like to walk in their shoes and see the world from their perspective. And then something remarkable happens between layer 6 and layer 7, and this is really the headline of the whole show at the moment and for the next 20 or 30 or 50 years.
This is the future of everybody who's living on the planet right now, and those who are still yet to come, is this particular headline.
And that is that human consciousness is taking a momentous leap, to use Cleargrave's words, and the capacity that we have to comprehend reality and to be human and to be human in the fullest and most integrated way is going to increase massively, because we're going to take this logarithmic shift upwards between layer 6 and layer 7. And Cleargraves wrote that layer 7, which I'm calling integrative, has more capacity to cope than all of the previous 6 layers combined. Just in that one system, layer 7, there is more capacity than all of the previous layers combined, and that is kind of a mind-blowing thought. So this is very, very interesting, and this is basically unprecedented as far as we know. There's no historical record of any massive increase in human consciousness like that. The only thing that maybe might come close is when we first became human from whatever we were before that. And it is going to change the world radically, and it's also going to bring a capacity for us to solve all of these problems that we have at a global scale at the moment, which seem insurmountable. And the idea that we're kind of going to hell in a handbasket, which a lot of people have right now. They're looking at the world and they're saying, how the hell are we going to solve all these problems? Because it's not just one problem, it's that problem affecting that problem affecting that problem, and this compounding. And we're seeing the degradation of leadership and the degradation of our social systems. And so it looks really, really grim. But the saving grace is this massive leap in consciousness. And of course, Clare Graves, in his research, he found a few people, not very many, but he found a few people back in the 1950s and early 60s who had already made this big leap in consciousness at an individual level. And it blew him away. It was actually, it made him stop and rethink everything that he was doing in terms of his research, because there was no real good description in any other theories of the scale of this increase in capacity.
And the phrase that you use here in this integrative stage is "I learn," and we could have mentioned some of the other ones before, but as you're speaking, I'm hearing there the capacity to finally accept all information on its merits, on its true merits, not affiliated with this idea or that idea, or to actually learn what actually works, what works to solve the problems.
What works is absolutely the guideline for layer 7. It's very tempting to think that one of these layers is going to bring the ultimate truth and we'll know everything. But what we do know from the research is that every time we get to a new layer, we think that okay, we've got it. We know how to fix all these problems down. We've got everything sorted. We understand everything. We can be fine, and for a little while we are, because we solve all our big problems, and then we have a bit of a cruisy time for a while until the new problems arrive, and then we find that we didn't know everything, even though we thought we did, and so we've got to go through this whole change process again, and we climb to a newer place on this evolutionary spiral. Which
has been very freeing for me, for example, coming in contact over the last year or so through you with this model, because suddenly there's no end game, there's no goal, and Graves himself identified this as that he could not see an end to this spiral of ever evolving, expanding beingness.
Yeah, and this is one of the significant differences from Abraham Maslow's theory, which had a triangle, a hierarchy-based triangle. Of human values and human progression, and Graves basically found that whole system was flipped upside down, and instead of being a pinnacle-based hierarchy, it was actually an open-ended spiral with as far as he could see, unlimited growth. And as long as our surrounds, our life conditions keep becoming more complex, then so will we. And so the 7th layer that he documented involves left and right brain integration in a very significant way. It brings a multi-dimensional view of life, and I mean that in a figurative sense in terms of being able to see the multiple dimensions of different aspects in the material world, but also in an absolute sense where we are becoming more aware of multiple dimensions of reality apart from this 3D physical material reality. The capacity to sense and read the previous layers of consciousness, which we didn't have before 7. So in layers 1 through 6, when we bump into someone else who's at a different layer of consciousness, it's like they're on a different frequency to us, and we say, well, I don't know about that person, they're in a different world, they just seem to have different values to us, and they're not on the same page. So often we just brand them as radical, different, or wrong. Whereas at 7, we can actually read that, okay, these people are operating from that frequency there, and that I remember that frequency. I grew through it some years ago. Right? It's
interesting when you mentioned the wisdom of the moccasins before in layer 6, because that's the first sort of beginning to be able to see that way, isn't it? In a way, to be able to attempt to try.
Layer 6, which is emerging as the new dominant global paradigm in the next decade or two, it's the foundation for this leap. Right? Yeah. And if you're going to make a big leap, then you've got to be standing on something solid to do that. Yeah. So 6 is laying the grounding for the big leap to happen, and that's part of the reason why there's a very strong healing dynamic. And in 6, it wants to shore itself up, it wants to check everything's okay and in order, and it wants to rebalance everything so that we're in a balanced place. And it's also feeling into this idea of being able to look from different perspectives. So there's an emergent multidimensionality, but it's in a single plane. In other words, it's on a level playing field or a flat surface, and it's spreading outwards. And it's really not accurate to call it multidimensionality. It's really a kind of diversity of perspective. And there's a subtle difference between diversity and multidimensionality, because the multidimensionality has a verticality to it.
Yeah. I was going to jump to something, but we'll have to come later to that, I think, because we're going to be talking about some of those evolutionary drivers between one layer and another. We'll see how far we get today with all that. There's so much here to talk about. And thanks for your text. I'll come back to those in a minute. We'll take a little break, though. Or you want to go to number 8 too, just for the expansion? Let's do number 8, because it's exciting to think about that future on this planet, possibly in your lifetime, maybe even in ours.
Yeah, and I'm sure
As
there'll
older
be some
folk.
life extension technology coming
Well, there you go.
with layer 7.
Yes.
So 7 was individually oriented. It's about changing the world. 8 is another communal system, which is about changing ourselves. And the communal systems tend to bring stability, whereas the individual systems push the limits and push us into different spaces, develop new technologies, those sorts of things. The communal systems tend to then take all of that new stuff and stabilize it and focus on creating stability and community in the world. And Graves didn't get much data at all on layer 8. He only had 6 people out of 1,065 who popped into it. And again, it blew his mind, because there was no model of human development that had more than 7 layers or stages at that time. And the best he could say about it was that it's like a recurrence of layer 2, in that it's a tribal kind of orientation, but it's massively more complex than layer 2, in that the scope of the tribal boundary or the tribal land is the entire planet.
And even beyond the entire planet, arguably.
In other dimensions. Yeah. And he said it was very mystical or spiritual in its orientation, highly intuitive. So both 7 and 8 are in a new zone called the trans-rational zone. So they're operating in a way that transcends the rational mind. Doesn't mean that it throws it out. It just means that it's still got the pre-rational, instinctive, and emotional layers. It's still got the rational mind in 3 layers, and then now we lay this very sophisticated intuition over the top of it, which I often call quantum consciousness, because I'm likening it to the kind of direct knowing that you see from entangled particles at a quantum level, where they can be remotely located, but they'll know which direction the other particle moving in the pair is spinning, for example. How it's feeling. So it's kind of like just a direct sensing process. So what we can expect to see at a global level when 8 starts to become dominant is we should see stable social systems which are truly planetary. We should see a very, very multi-dimensional level of awareness, to the point of possibly some kind of telepathic communication, I think. So remembering that with each of these steps into a new layer, we expand our sensory perception. Very new relationships with time, the capacity to feel into the future quite accurately, most likely. And I would say probably very sophisticated and capable, yet fair and equitable and non-dominating global systems of coordination for everything, basically. Yeah.
Sounds beautiful.
For all of you out there, strangers in a strange land, you're grokking FutureSense here on Bay FM.
Yes, Interdimensional Space Vehicle 999. And it was designed like that, actually. Steve, you may not. This is actually designed a bit like a Star Trek bridge back in the 90s and early 2000s. We had that sort of tongue-in-cheek, slightly.
It is actually,
Isn't it? It's a bit like that. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a little bit past its use-by date now, folks. We do need some philanthropic generosity here so we can update a little bit, but that's another story altogether. You heard then Sarah Blasco and An Oyster, a Pearl. And before that, a track from The Human Experience called Let the Clean Water, from an album of the same name. And thanks for your text. Text coming in, just wanted to share this. A review of Avatar, the movie, by a YouTuber called The Angry Hippie, is right up your alley, guys. It speaks of evolution, psychological development, ayahuasca, mycelium, neo-humanism, and other interesting subjects. Great content. And that's a fairly recent piece that's come out. It's from October the 22nd this year, and you can have a look. I've just got it in front of me. It's about 50 minutes long. It's from The Angry Hippie, if you're interested in having a look at that.
But maybe we can post that on our Facebook page.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through, as we've been talking about, though, the layers we've sort of refreshed you with here. For those who've heard it before, I'm sure you've got some new juice and some interesting other perspectives from what Steve's been talking about here. And for those who've never heard it before, hopefully that gives you a bit of a sketch on much of which we base this show upon. The other element here is the drivers, the evolutionary drivers from moving from one layer to another layer. And that's what we're going to have a bit of a sketch of now.
Yeah, I'll quickly run through those for each of the layers, and then later in the show, if we have time, we'll zero in on the current transition that the world is going through from 5 to 6. So, as we mentioned previously, each layer of consciousness emerges and solves the problems created by the previous layer, and then over time it creates more complexity, which gives rise to more complex problems, and eventually it's got to outgrow itself in order to solve those problems. And so the evolutionary tension is essentially the driver for change. Yeah. This tension between what we're called to do and what we feel and are actually capable of doing. And that it's that tension which drives us to transform ourselves, often by throwing us into a very, very difficult space. And we find ourselves initially in a place of feeling uncomfortable with life and that things just aren't quite right. And that often causes us to go on a regressive search and to look backwards through our own history to times when we remember that things were good and we were coping.
Make America great again.
That's right. And that regressive search takes us back to older values which are less complex and actually less capable of solving our problems. And we're seeing this dynamic at a global level at the moment where our leaders are going back to old values, and those old values are very, very clearly not making the grade. They're not actually solving the problems at all, and that's creating more tension. And I call this the slingshot effect, where it's like pulling the elastic band on a slingshot, and you're putting more and more tension on that elastic band, and just when you think the band is about to break and you can't take the tension anymore, it lets loose, and you get catapulted forward into something new.
Which could, of course, happen in an individual life or on a societal level, on a global level, in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
All sorts of possibilities there.
Yeah, exactly. And as each new layer of consciousness emerges, it actually gives rise to a new operating frequency. So you can think of each layer as a different operating frequency, or maybe a different computer operating system. Yeah. Like it's like an upgrade.
Or a different octave.
Well, there are
that's a way of looking.
Yeah, there are harmonics, and you can look at the sequence of layers as a musical keyboard, and you'll get octaves and harmonics there. But
whatever metaphor works for you, folks.
That's right. And so with the emergence of a new layer, we're developing more complex consciousness, so awareness of reality and all its aspects. More complex intelligences. In other words, many of the intelligences that we already have are pushed into, beyond our boundaries and into new, more complex and more capable places, which gives us a greater capacity to cope with life. And the drivers of this transition between the different layers vary. Each particular layer has its own specific drivers in terms of the kind of tension that emerges. And so from moving from hunter-gatherer to tribal, it's primarily fear and the desire to be safe that drives that transition. And there's
safety numbers.
Yeah, and that because tribal is a community-oriented layer, and we're also moving right now, many people on the planet are moving to this sixth layer, which is also community-oriented and has its own tribal nature, and it has a harmonic resonance with the second layer, a very strong one. I think there's probably a lot of people listening who know what it feels like to find your tribe, right?
Yes.
You've been out there, sort of a loose hunter-gatherer kind of an existence, and all of a sudden you bump into these people that you vibe with, who share your values, and they share their stuff with you, and you share your stuff with them, and all of a sudden you get this wonderful collaborative dynamic which emerges, and so that it's that kind of those kind of drivers which are behind this move from hunter-gatherer to tribal society, and the feeling of safety. So there's a problem that's resolved by moving into this new living environment where you suddenly feel safe and you feel good and you've got access to more stuff and more resources and things. And then the transition from tribal to the third layer, egocentric, which is from communal back to individual again. It emerges out of the complexity that's created by the tribal way of living, which it involves abiding by customs, being within a somewhat structured kind of relationship in the tribe. And in the traditional tribes, it is hierarchical, where you've got usually a head of the tribe,
the elders, the wise man, the shaman,
the elders, the favoured son or daughter, those sorts of things. And any kind of communal system, because of the conformity that it demands, every communal system demands some kind of conformity, it can become smothering in a way. And so in the tribal to egocentric transition, people tend to get angry. And they get angry that they can't have more freedom, that they can't do things that are against the customs of the tribe. They can't go beyond the tribal boundaries. They can't get involved in the decision-making process unless, of course, they're in that inner circle at the top of the tribe. And so that anger starts to create tension.
As you said earlier, this equates to the adolescent period of a human being's life.
It's going through puberty and wanting to bust out of the family restrictions is the key example there. And there can be a feeling that you believe that you're more powerful than your parents or elders in the tribe, and that you can confront danger directly rather than having to be sheltered or protected or follow rules to stay away from it. And then I'm going to run through this fairly quickly just so we can cover them all and get on to talking about some more stuff. So then the transition beyond the egocentric layer to the fourth layer, which is like an authoritarian agricultural way of living, and the emergence of this rationality, as we said before.
And again, back to a communal expression.
So the egocentric way of living creates complex problems, and because it's such a wild way of living, it's not abiding by any written rules or structure so much. It's just acting on impulse a lot of the time and instinct.
Only so much pillaging you can do, really.
That's right. And it tends to, over time, create a sense of guilt and shame when we start to become aware of the impact of our behaviours on others, because the egocentric mind tends not to consider, and in fact hasn't got the capacity to consider the impact of its actions on others. And when we start pushing the limits of the egocentric, we're also growing into a place of being more aware of our surroundings and more aware of our impact on others around us. And so that starts to develop a kind of an evolutionary tension around guilt and shame, for the kind of behaviours and things. We also start to question the meaning of life.
Start to look for more purpose in what we do.
We start to look for some kind of a philosophical structure that we can grab onto. Where that just doesn't exist prior to that. And the wild nature of the egocentric way of living just eventually demands a return to some kind of order and structure, because we get a sense that we're not actually going in any direction, we're just doing stuff. And again, there are echoes of that individual to communal transition in the current transition also, because layer 5, the modern, is just a more sophisticated version of layer 3, the egocentric.
And there is a significant amount of guilt and shame that is arising in many, many people now for the way that we've behaved on this planet for so long now.
That's right, So layer 4, the authoritarian, agricultural, structured, communal way of living, in the transition from there to the modern scientific, industrial way of being human. Again, because the authoritarian is a communal structure, over time these communal structures, they demand that we conform to some kind of community agreement, and that becomes suffocating, and the key driver is really frustration. The sort of extreme level of order and conformity required in that authoritarian way of living just makes us frustrated, because when you think about examples in everyday life, and one example might be let's just take religion for one example of an authoritarian.
You can take religion. I don't want it.
Structure. Another thing that changes when we move between these layers is our perception of time changes. Okay, and the individual layers tend to be focused on the short term, whereas the community layers tend to think in the long term. And in the authoritarian layer, everything comes later, right? You got to be good now to get rewarded in heaven. You got to work hard.
Follow those commandments, folks.
Job to after 40 years you'll get your pension and your gold watch or whatever it is. your Apple Watch these days.
People still get an Apple Watch or a Gold Watch. I wonder, God, that's so archaic, it seems, talking about time.
But, after a while, when there's sufficient complexity and it starts to drive this change, people get so frustrated. They just say, well, I want it now. Right? I'm sick of waiting. I'm not going to work like this I'm not going to live the rest of my life. I actually want to find heaven now. Yeah, and
I want to take risks and experiment to get there.
Exactly. And that's one of the emerging drivers of the change, and this need for short-term tangible results, because often in authoritarian layer 4 systems the results are not so tangible, particularly if they're coming after death. And so that takes us to the modern paradigm, the modern way of being human, and the drivers beyond that are all around us at the moment. So the modern individually oriented layer is very competitive, of course. It's all about being the best, and that has to be an individual race. And sure, we'll collaborate with other people and we'll work with other people. Ultimately, it's me who wants to be the best. And, not everyone can be the best in a modern system. And that competition creates loneliness because it disconnects us.
It's really important, isn't it? Obviously, it's important because this is how a lot of people are clearly feeling right now, in fact, in the world. This sense of loneliness arriving despite the complexity of their life, despite how they're situated in communities and businesses or family structures, whatever. There is this sense that a
desire for deeper connection.
Yeah, deeper connection.
Yeah, and an example of how the modern layer, the modern paradigm has created more complexity, which is causing it to need to outgrow itself, is all of our social technology has been constructed by this modern scientific industrial era. And yet, even though it connects us in an electronic sense, it's absent the deep, actual personal connection. And people are looking at screens, not other people. Yeah.
And of course, one of the other drivers is the fact that this quest for success has created even more radical social inequality across the board.
That's right. When you live life to be the best, then not everybody's going to be the best. And so we've had this separation into the 1% and the 99%. That's often
who's not going to be president of the United States.
Yeah. So social inequality becomes extreme, and certainly we're seeing that at the moment. And so there's this perceived balance imperative where you want to actually, you perceive an imbalance in the world and you want to find ways of rebalancing. How can we redistribute these resources? How can we rebalance our life, instead of having to compete in this rat race the whole week and then have to spend the weekend recovering and then do it all over again? How can we find balance in our own life? How can we find deeper human connection? So these are the key drivers in this transition from the modern layer 5 to layer 6.
It's so true. People come back from holidays these days and they're more burnt out than being at work.
That's right. Yeah. And I can remember back in my life times when I was living according to that particular way of being human. That I would, I'd work really, really hard all week and then just have this massive pressure release, which back in those days, usually involved drinking a lot of alcohol, and then spend the rest of the weekend recovering from that, and then go and start it all over again. And so the last two transitions, the transitional factors that we're going to look at here are poking into the future.
Across the momentous leap.
So what happens once the humanistic way of being human plays out, and we're going to see this around the world over the next couple of decades, is that this tendency to want to rebalance things to solve the problems, actually it helps a lot, but it doesn't solve the deeper causative factors that are creating the problems. It's kind of superficial, because layer 6 likes everything to be on a level playing field, and it is very anti-hierarchy. It loves to collapse hierarchies, and a lot of those dynamics are a rejection kind of a process that is just looking at what went wrong with the old paradigm, or what was perceived to be wrong about the old paradigm, and to want to just change that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good example. I don't know if I can paraphrase this, but if I can very quickly, heard a program recently about the programs in America coming after the assassination of Martin Luther King, in particular in the 60s, and also the Kennedys, but more specifically Martin Luther King, and how that quest for racial equality in America was very successful in some ways, but the response that came about was all these social fixes, which, according to this black academic who was speaking about this, actually created more problems than it actually solved. And it was quite astounding to really listen to that in depth. If anybody's interested, there was a Radio National program a few weeks ago I heard on somewhere or other. But we'll find it.
Yeah, in a nutshell, there's the whole evolutionary dynamic. It's trying to solve the problems, but just in the process.
Yeah. And with all good intention, but actually it didn't work the way it was supposed to do.
Yeah. So towards the back end of layer 6, as it's playing out, this cost of caring becomes overwhelming.
Yes.
The attempts at social fixes through essentially rebalancing resources start to create chaos, because while they, on a surface level, they appear to be addressing the problems, underneath the deep drivers which are actually creating the problems are not being addressed.
Yeah.
And so we see an increase in chaos. And it's going to be very, very interesting to live through this over the next couple of decades as it plays out on a global level. And where there's always chaos in the transition period between paradigms. It's not just specific to this particular paradigm, because the old structures have to fall apart sufficiently to make room for new structures to come in and take their place.
I think this idea, maybe you can expand on this a bit, the idea of the cost of caring is overwhelming. And I guess this is also what is the source of the kind of confusion that we are experiencing in a lot of layer 6 in particular now, as we're sort of on that edge now, that we care so much that's too much to care about, and there's nothing that can simply and easily be done from where we actually are at now.
That's true. And another factor to consider there is the expansion of our capacity to feel into the experiences of other people. So this perspective changing ability which comes with layer 6, where we can step into someone else's shoes, as we do that, we can also not just see the world from their perspective, but we can feel the world from their perspective as well. And that is overwhelming. That can be overwhelming. That
level of beyond compassion into empathy, into greater levels of empathy is it's quite shocking for many people to experience that.
And often when people are on the back end of this 6 layer and starting their transition into 7, a report feeling like they can feel the weight of the world on their shoulders, and it's just too much. Like they've got to stop looking at the news because it creates too much distress. It's overwhelming. And I'm sure there are people out there listening who've experienced exactly that.
Yep.
And eventually, the need for functionality becomes critical. So the need for essentially a rebalancing between this swing which has occurred from the materialistic, scientific, industrial, rather clinical way of living to this almost over-caring layer 6, which in trying to compensate for the shallowness and the clinical nature of 5 has swung a little bit too far in the other direction by the time the paradigm has played itself out. Okay? And that will create the tension to drive this big leap in consciousness.
Because that sort of functionality, because the word functionality, I think, particularly to layer 6 people, I would suggest, and correct me if I'm wrong, is judged in a sort of pejorative way, that functionality shouldn't be the way things are. We need something better than functionality. But this is talking about a different level of functionality, isn't it? On a higher level, where you actually have to discard all your belief systems and allegiances to all sorts of things for what actually works to solve the problems, no matter where that comes from.
Yeah, so what we see with the emergence of layer 7 is the capacity to read the previous layers, whereas previously they're not visible. We can't see them, okay? So when we're in the first 6 layers, we're in what Claire Graves called the first tier of consciousness, where like a fish in a fish bowl, at each layer we're kind of in the water, but we can't see the water, and we're not really aware that there are all these other fish bowls there, and people are living in different worlds. And so we try and apply the problems that would solve our issues to every issue. It's kind of like only, at each layer you've got a set of tools, and sometimes if you want to fix a problem which is characteristic of a different layer of consciousness, your tools are not going to be the right tools for fixing it. Whereas with 7 can read the different frequencies, it can adapt and shapeshift, and it can apply tools appropriate to different layers of consciousness to fix the problems that they have at those different layers. So the whole world is not making this shift through the spiral at the same time. We're all spread across the spectrum. There are still people in the world who are living in traditional tribal ways in various countries. There are still countries that are oriented entirely around the authoritarian agricultural way of living. There are still modern countries, and there are emergent countries that are living in layer 6 already, some of the Northern European countries, for example.
Yep.
And so if we want to take a big picture perspective and we really want to address these global issues, we've got to actually notice, okay, which world are we operating on here? Are we operating on a tribal society in another country that have different values than our country? Therefore, if we are, we need to apply solutions that address their values and their issues from their perspective, not from our perspective. And we've seen a lot of this in the modern era where certain countries have invaded other countries and then tried to impose their systems on them, and it hasn't worked very well at all because the country actually doesn't need those systems. It needs different solutions. So 7.
That's great.
Yeah.
Take that in, folks. That's really important, that point that Steve made just then, I think.
So 7 brings this adaptive capacity, a shape-shifting capacity to be whatever you want to be and, construct solutions that are very specific to different human operating frequencies or operating systems that we just didn't have the capacity before. So just to really wrap up this transition thing so we can get on to talking about some more interesting stuff. And then
this is pretty interesting.
The transition, easy to get sidetracked though.
Yes.
The transition from 7 to 8, again, this is very sketchy because there are very few examples that have been documented. I think there's more of this consciousness out there than there was when Graves did his research, but no one's continued his research the way that he was doing it, to my knowledge. So I often think of layer 7 as kind of like the first responders on an accident scene. And we can see even from the previous perspectives like layer 6, we can look at the world and we can see all the problems that are compounding at the moment, and we're very concerned and trying to anticipate these problems, before they become completely disruptive on a planetary scale, like climate change, like population migration, like the spread of infectious diseases. You name it. There's a whole raft of different issues out there which are creating tensions at a global level, and intelligent people can see that, okay, this is going to come to a head sometime. We need to do something about it. And really, layer 7, the leap in consciousness and the increasing capacity that comes with that, gives us what we need. It gives us the thinking, it gives us the tools and the insights to be able to solve those major global level problems. But it's like you've just arrived at an accident scene. When you pop into layer 7 and you look at the world, you go, oh, holy hell, look at this, we need to fix this. And we can, but we need to attend to the most important things first. You've got to do a triage, just like medical staff do when they arrive at an accident scene. It's okay, we got to fix that and that first, because unless we fix that, we're not going to be able to, fix these other things. Those problems are going to get in the way. And so there's a lot of immediate response and critical care that happens during that time that layer 6 emerges as the dominant global system. And then layer 8 as a community system then brings stability to that. So it takes the repaired scene and then develops new, more comprehensive, inclusive and whole social systems on a global scale that can maintain balance and stability on the planet for many years to come. So the key driving factors are that these global crises require macro management on a global scale, that we must tap into a deeper way of knowing, this quantum consciousness, in order to access the solutions that are needed. We don't have time to do scientific industrial scale research studies and then have them peer reviewed
20 years later,
the data and
influenced
then transmuted into syllabus at an institution so people can go and do a 4-year degree to fix. We don't have time for that anymore. I hope someone from the education industry is listening out there. We just don't have time for that. So we have to switch to a new way of operating, which is this deep intuitive guidance, the quantum consciousness of just knowing what needs to be done.
Because these layers are trans-rational, so as you just articulated really well there, it's not going back to that same old model of rational scientific approach. It's laborious and also fraught with all sorts of influences, and as we're seeing now with fake news, fake science, and altered things.
And we'll get on to talking a little bit about how science is being influenced by the emergence of layer 6 shortly, before we wrap the show up. So layer 8 is basically sensing order within an apparent chaos and then working with that natural order to create stability on the planet. So that's a very quick summary of what drives the transitions between these different layers, and I'm sure if you're listening, then you probably identify with some of those tensions and drivers at various aspects of your life and how they were influencing you.
We have a text from someone who's asking, how can I find out more about the layers on your morning program? Thanks to Darren. One, you could go to our FutureSense podcast on iTunes, which is free, by the way, and listen to past shows, because we're always talking on different perspectives and from different angles and different ways around this model.
Yeah, and one of our key missions is to get this information out there a bit more, because Clare Graves died before he published his work academically. There aren't a lot of really solid resources out there. There were two academics who were working with him before he passed away, who eventually wrote a book called Spiral Dynamics: Mastering Values, Leadership and Change. The book was crafted for the corporate leadership market, so it's got a kind of a bit of a corporate spin on it and a lot of jargon and stuff, but the essence of Clare Graves' work is what the book is based upon. They did also draw on some other influences as well, but I'd recommend that Spiral Dynamics book as a good introduction to the model. And then there was another book published in 2005 called The Never Ending Quest by Christopher Cowan and Natasha Todorovich.
It's only 600 odd pages.
It's a collection of Clare Graves' research notes, so it's not really the kind of book that you would read cover to cover. It's more a reference book, and you can look up what Clare Graves wrote about the different value systems and dynamics.
There's also some good audio that you can listen to that's not us, and Ken Wilber, for example.
Ken Wilber has a more expansive perspective on things in his integral theory, but his integral theory includes developmental psychology, so there are aspects of Wilber's work that are very relevant also. Don Beck, who is one of the authors of the Spiral Dynamics book, has put out some audio, and you can find both Don Beck's audio and Ken Wilber's audio at soundstrue.com.
Excellent.
You're resonating right now on FutureSense with Steve McDonald and Nyck Jeanes.
You're on FutureSense here with Nick and Steve through to 11 o'clock. Pregnancy, birth and beyond is up next. We do have a giveaway here this morning, and thanks to the Brunswick Picture House for this. And it is a double pass giveaway for work in progress at the Brunswick Picture House on Thursday the 10th of January at 7 p.m. And it's Dave Hughes, the Australian comedy icon. His laconic style thinly veils one of the country's fastest comedic minds. This is your chance to see Hughesy up close and personal as he trials brand new material on the sunny shores of Brunswick Heads. So give us a call if you're a subscriber to BFM, 66807 66807 and be in the draw. Just run it for about 15 minutes or so. We are going to range now, bring the magnifying glass a bit closer into the transition that's most important and is most prevalent on the planet right now, and that's the transition from layer 5 to layer 6, and some of those drivers in a bit more detail. Steve?
Yeah, so one of the themes that we're seeing emerging with layer 6 as it becomes more influential around the world is this strong desire to humanize the world. So the modern scientific industrial era has been dehumanizing in many ways. I think there are a few factors that which contribute to that. One is its materialistic kind of outlook, and mainstream science, of course, only measures things that it can register on its various instruments of measurement, whether it be seeing it with the human eye or measuring it with some electronic gadget. And things that can't be measured seem to be devalued or even denied.
And in terms of science itself, of course, we could bring in that phrase we mentioned at the beginning of the show, hard science versus soft science. There's really been an era of hard science this last couple of hundred years, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And the soft sciences, the sciences which look at human experience and human impressions, tend to be pushed aside or devalued during that modern scientific industrial era. I think that's changing at the moment.
Yes, and that's interesting. So things like psychology, sociology, anthropology, some aspects of archaeology and other things you could argue, but certainly there's a change in that. We might get to flesh that out a bit too as part of this. Yeah,
so in this push to rehumanize life on planet Earth, there's been a move to anthropocentrism, and even the whole era that we're moving into now has been described by some people as the anthropocentric era.
Yeah,
because it's an era which is characterized by the human impact on the planet and anthropomorphic thinking. So the tendency to want to give human qualities to things that are not human,
plants, animals.
Yeah.
Even ideas, perhaps.
That's right. Right, and even planet Earth.
And planet Earth itself,
given a character
Mother Earth,
as the
Gaia.
Mother Gaia,
which is a beautiful, poetic, and gorgeous concept,
yet it is, and it's an echo of the animistic
Yes.
belief systems of the original tribal era, the traditional tribal era, and it's actually adding value. It's helpful at this time when we're moving out of the scientific industrial paradigm, and we need to rebalance this imbalance which has emerged because of the materialistic approach that we've been taking.
Yeah.
So the really interesting thing about Clare Graves' work is because he's described sufficiently these different ways of being human, these operating frequencies, the behaviours and the values that drive them, we can, in advance, to some extent, we can anticipate some of the difficulties that might arise as we move into these paradigms. So that's very valuable, particularly for those operating from a second-tier perspective who have the insight and the visibility of these paradigms and where they're playing out in various places around the world. And to have Clare Graves' work to draw on, which guides us into anticipating some of the problems that we're probably going to create, even to the point of knowing, what the key drivers are going to be for future paradigm shifts. I mean, it's very valuable information.
Yeah.
Very valuable information. So let's to be a bit controversial here. Use
love it.
As
Good.
our example of this orange-green layer 5, layer 6 transition. I was just referring to the colours from the spiral dynamics model there. So if you look at the spiral dynamics book, you'll see that the different layers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 have been given coded colours.
Which is quite beautiful. This layer 6 is the green colour.
Yeah,
it's
which is
very appropriate.
Quite appropriate, actually. Yeah, quite. So let's have a look at climate and climate science. So I pointed Nyck over the weekend to a website called Climateism, which is very interesting. It's I guess it's a backlash to the anthropocentric global warming theory and all of the push behind that. And it's there are probably a number of factors behind it. One of them is probably a regression to harder science to try and solve some of the problems which are being thrown up by the global discussions around climate change. And I guess one of the key difficulties that we're seeing at the moment is the fact that so many people are pushing for changes to the way that we live and the way that we burn fossil fuels and our whole outlook on energy use and those sorts of things in response to what's perceived as a linear global warming trend.
Yes, and the word linear is the most important word there, is it?
And yet, so many people are pushing back against it also. So many governments are just saying, well, no, actually, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep doing things the way that we do them. So it's creating a great deal of evolutionary tension. And it's probably one of the key topics that's generating evolutionary tension on the planet at the moment, I think. And ultimately, that's a very good thing because it's the evolutionary tension that drives the change. It's the fuel.
As you've said before, Al Gore's movie An Inconvenient Truth was exactly that, wasn't it? Because it actually brought onto the agenda, onto the world stage, this global perspective of those issues that we have. And yet the bringing forth the actual solutions to them is something different from the reaction to the problems that is actually occurring.
That's right. Yeah, Al Gore used the overview effect. He showed a picture of planet Earth and spoke in very global terms when his movie came out, which must have been in the early 2000s, I guess. And I at the time I saw that as a very, very beneficial thing, and I'd already started studying Clare Graves' work by the time Al's movie came out, and I thought I could see the benefit in it because it was turning people's attention to the planet. And also starting to drive this reconnection with nature, which is one aspect of the transition to layer 6. Whereas in layer 5, nature was a resource to be dug up and used, basically.
Yes.
And Al Gore was kicking off this new perspective. And even though there were many faults in what he did, and many of the predictions that he made haven't come true, they weren't accurate. His science was flawed. Nevertheless, it's been very beneficial to help drive the momentum of this shift from layer 5 to 6. And with the desire to bring greater humanism to just everything that we do, we've even started to skew the way that we do science. And it's interesting, it's very, very subtle, but it's interesting if you start to take notice of the media reports around the global warming issue And even as you were saying over breakfast this morning, Nick, even the terminology is shifting. Like, you don't hear people saying global warming so much now as just climate change, right?
Yes.
And I think part of the reason for that, at least, is that, like most systems all natural systems really on planet Earth, our climate is a complex, adaptive system. And our climate scientists haven't yet accepted or opened to the fact that it is an adaptive system, right? It's an adaptive system because it's a fundamentally natural, intelligent system, just like every natural system on the planet.
Yeah.
And yet all of our climate science is based on looking at what's happening now and then drawing a straight line on any trend that they see into the future. And of course, no natural complex adaptive system works in straight lines.
Sort of the fault of a sort of purely causative approach to things. And on this, thank you for your text. Someone's pointed us to the website spaceweather.com, which we are very familiar with. And the influence on that complex adaptive system, not only of what's going on the Earth system, but what's happening with the Sun in particular and other galactic inputs and areas of our galaxy we may be moving through. All sorts of factors may be impacting. Certainly the Sun is a big one, and I think the Sun's influence is certainly starting to take a bit of a foothold into the science, into the equation, it would seem.
It is. I think we found on that climatism website, and again, we haven't verified this claim, but the website said that in 2018, I think there were 500 scientific papers, peer-reviewed scientific papers published, which ran counter to the standard public belief that we're on a linear warming trend.
Yeah.
And thanks for that spaceweather.com website suggestion to whoever sent that in, because there's a new index, climate index, that they're showing on that website, which is called the Thermosphere Climate Index.
Oh, yes.
And it's a relatively new space weather metric that tells us how the top of the Earth's atmosphere is responding to solar activity. And it's proving to be potentially a more accurate indicator than our conventional ways of weathering, of measuring things like sea surface temperature and those sorts of things. And of course, what it's telling us is that we're actually not on a linear warming trend, but in fact we're on a long-term global cooling trend. And the people who came up with this Thermosphere Climate Index system had access to data which has allowed them to basically reverse engineer the trends back to about early 1940s, according to the graph I'm looking at the moment on the spaceweatherarchive.com website. And you can see quite clearly there that the thermosphere has been gradually cooling. Like any natural system, it oscillates in a kind of a roughly sine wave pattern, and you can see that the peaks of temperature have slowly been declining since the high on the graph is just before 1960. Which is supporting a bunch of other fairly complex and capable scientific efforts that we talk about regularly on the show, which are suggesting that we're in a long-term global cooling trend. But because the climate is a complex adaptive system, whenever a complex adaptive system goes through change, it becomes chaotic. So it becomes more unpredictable, and the performance spikes in both directions. And this is why we are seeing spikes in hot weather. There's no doubt about that. I think we just had a very significant heat wave over the Christmas period here in Australia. But we're also seeing spikes in cold weather. And at the same time as we're having heat waves down here, they're having cold weather records broken.
Coldest Thanksgiving in the US in 150 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, we also talk about Martin Armstrong, and he reports that NASA, which has already confirmed before that we are going into a cooling period, not warming. They've also put out a forecast of declining sunspot activity, and confirming what Martin Armstrong's computer has been forecasting, reporting that as the sun is experiencing a rapid decline in sunspots, it is also dimming in brightness of energy output. And it looks like that not only will the trend move towards cold, but there is a high probability, he claims, that we are declining now for the next 30 or so years into the 2040s in temperature.
And what's shifted in our public perspective on science as Layer 6 becomes more influential, because we are rejecting everything that came from the modern era because it has caused the problems that we need to solve now. Hard science has been pushed down, it's being pushed aside, it's getting less exposure in the media, and humanistic science is being pushed. So you'll often see reports talking about the scientific evidence, and rather than saying, well, these scientists produced an evidence-based predictive model which has been used repeatedly and is accurate. And of course, we don't have anything like that in relation to climate science. So we don't have any models that can accurately predict future climate at this point, even though. And so, a lot of what's being reported is that 94% of scientists agree that this is happening. And so you can see how that's been taken from hard data into a humanistic perspective. So rather than look at the data, let's look at how many people agree with us. Yeah. And therefore the science is being softened and humanized, which is ultimately also has its advantages. And it's a good thing, and there's no doubt that we need to rehumanize ourselves after this very clinical, materialistic, scientific industrial era. However, it's also wise just to be aware of how this changing perspective is more a knee-jerk reaction to what we perceive as being wrong about the previous era, rather than a more complex insight into the dynamics of what's driving our climate.
Yeah. So, and what we're saying here is that this is a transition along the way as we evolve now, as we move into this stage 6. This is a kind of stage that one, on an individual and a global level, as we're seeing now, is a position that many people will take. What you just articulated there, but it's a sort of station along the way to a bigger perspective as we move forward.
It is, yeah. You can think about this swing between the individual separate way of being human and the communal connected way of being human as like a big pendulum that swings backwards and forwards as we progress up the spiral. And it's a very unconscious process in the first 6 layers. So including this layer that's emerging, the 6th layer globally at the moment, we're still pretty unconscious and not aware of this dynamic. But that pendulum swings to extremes. And we're just seeing the results of the extreme of the 5th individual disconnecting, kind of separately oriented layer.
Yes.
And in sort of a pushback against that, then we're trying to swing that pendulum back the other way, and sometimes the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater in that effort to try and rebalance things radically.
Yeah. There's so much to talk about. We're almost out of time. It's 10:47 here on Bay FM. We might have to leave it there and come back for a bit of a summary about a couple of other things we'd like to talk to you about. But there's so much more to say. We're just going to have to continue. And
next week we'll be back.
Next week we'll be back. And of course, as we've been saying, we are now also on iTunes under FutureSense, which is rather convenient because when we named this show, we didn't realise that there was an ABC Radio National show called Future Tense.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is really good too. So
I did know that actually.
Yes, did you? Because well done. Because now if you search for FutureSense, if you search for Future Tense from Radio National, you'll find us as well.
That's
so
right.
It's rather good.
That's right.
Well positioned, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you.
Major, I like that.
For all of you out there, strangers in a strange land, you're grokking FutureSense here on Bay FM.
And you've got about 1 minute if you want to get in the draw for the work in progress at the Brunswick Picture House. It's Thursday the 10th of January. That's a show with Dave Hughes, the very well-known Australian comedy icon. A double pass giveaway. Call up now, 6687 and also Howie, who's a regular listener. Hey Howie, has just mentioned that there is a one-off screening of the documentary Kangaroo, which apparently is fantastic, disturbing but fantastic, at South Golden Beach Community Centre on this Wednesday the 9th at 7:30pm. $5 only entry with Q&A with the filmmakers Mick and Kate McIntyre, well-known local filmmakers or Australian filmmakers. Here, we're just winding up the show today, and you, Steve, who do travel around the world to speak at various symposiums and conferences in the last couple of years, you are doing the same at a conference down the coast at Coffs Harbour on the 17th, 18th and 19th of this month. What's that all about?
That's right. So I'm giving a TED-style talk on entheogens in the mystery traditions, so the use of psychoactive substances in the non-mainstream spiritual traditions throughout history, and how influential they've been, particularly through altered state work. And then I'm running a 2-hour workshop on light body activation. So in that workshop, I'm working with a good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Stephen Booth, who we had on the show last year.
Couple of times, yep.
And I'll be talking about Claire Graves's map to the future and how our consciousness is shifting at the moment, and we'll be combining that knowledge with practical experience of how the body's subtle energy systems are being upgraded, particularly as we transition into the second tier of consciousness. And that's Stephen Booth will be talking about some of the theory behind the subtle energy geometry, and we'll do some practical exercises with the people in the workshop so that they may have a peak experience of light body activation.
Indeed, and I'm not actually talking to Steve here. I'm talking to a light form in front of me. It's absolutely beautiful, radiant, and rainbows and sparks and lights and electricity moving through magnetic quantities.
Cute angel sounds.
Cute. I don't know what an angel sounds like. If you want to check out the Illuminate, it's called Illuminate Aspects of Consciousness Symposium from the 17th, 18th and 19th down at Danuka Beach Resort in Coffs Harbour. There's a Facebook page for that. A lot of very interesting talks about all sorts of things that many of which we do talk about here on the show.
It should be fun, I think. And the people who run that, they have in the past run conferences on ET contact and also the afterlife.
Yeah, so there's a bit of that too, and I'm sure there are still some tickets available, and I might be going down there too for a day myself and seeing if I can fit that in. How can we wrap up today? So we've got about a minute left. We'll play a track before Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond is in the house, and also we'll have to draw that drawer if our wonderful front desk people can bring up the tin. Oh yes, and thanks to Ross Hill, who's just texted us and said, "Good morning, nice show. We'll have it on the web later this week." Thank you, and a beautiful photograph of the two of you, looking absolutely gorgeous. Only saw you yesterday up here.
Ross and Anne.
Not Ross and Anne. They're in another dimension now.
Yeah, it's called Melbourne.
Yeah. Anything else to say? I mean, it's almost like we spoke a lot today, a lot of things there, and hopefully it was very valuable to you, and we will continue. But there is just so much to talk about.
It's just area. It's a rabbit hole, isn't it?
It's a rabbit hole. Not to get confused or overwhelmed. But if you do, that's perfect. That's a good sign that you're actually on the edge of transition. One could argue.
That's right.
If you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the life, the universe, and everything at the moment on this planet, but see it as a positive sign if you can. See that and open up to the paradox of being that we now are living in, and that intuitive and creative capacity that we all actually have. Indeed. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Nick.
Lovely to be here, and we'll be back with you next Monday morning. And thanks for listening. Bye.
You've been listening to FutureSense, a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia, at bayfm.org. FutureSense is available on iTunes and SoundCloud. The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.